Hey, Advanced Web Design, welcome to some JavaScript arrays. So let's go ahead and start this thing out with what you need to have in, which is the Advanced Web Design skeleton. You can tell it's the proper skeleton because it has the CSS variables at the top that are already declared for you to just to kind of make it easier for the page. So you know that's the proper skeleton because you have that. I did update this in your Google Classroom to make sure that the skeleton is indeed in there. So let's go ahead and work down the page. I'm going to do some of this stuff quickly so you can just kind of see what's going down without having to wait for me to type it. So what we're going to do, we're going to work top down-ish. So we're going to start with some CSS that we have to add. So in our CSS, we have to add a couple of different things. So underneath of our container, everything stays the same up to container. Underneath our container, there are a couple of things that we have to add. And we're not going to put these HTML elements on the actual page yet. We're going to actually add them through JavaScript, which is going to be fun. I actually like this one quite a lot, so we're going to go. So we have two separate things. We're going to use, like most things in life, a flexbox display. So right underneath of your container, you're going to add two chunks. So you're going to have a div with the ID, of infobox. This is going to be the target for our CSS or for our JavaScript that we write, and we're going to change the inner HTML of this particular box to include the stuff we're going to add. So then inside of our info box, we're going to generate a couple of boxes, standard flexbox setup with a couple of built-in text things or colors that we already have in our variables, and our overflow of hidden because we're going to set a border radius, or we did set a border radius. So when we do our next section, we want that to not be weird. So we're going to make it not weird. So inside of our box, also, we're going to have a header for the box, which is our H3. Sorry. And let me make that towards the top of the page. So inside of our dot box, we have an H3 we're going to edit, and we're just going to make this look a little bit nicer on the page. This is weird CSS. You're not going to be able to see the effects right away. But in this case, the CSS isn't the point. We just can't do it without it because it would look just terrible. So we'd spend a couple minutes doing the CSS. Hopefully it won't take you that long. So that's the CSS we have to add to make this look not horrific. Let's go ahead while we're here, change the page title and all those things. So this, we'll call this JS Arrays 1. And that'll be fine enough. I don't think we have another place to put that. That's fine enough. So before we get into talking about what these actual arrays are, I'm going to pop a couple of things on for HTML. The HTML is actually really, really short. And I'm just going to put it on here so you can see it, and then I'm going to talk about it as we go. So you're going to have a button that's going to run our click function, which is generate boxes. We're going to do the JavaScript, which is the main focus, of course, here. But our button, we're going to have to run our JavaScript, and it's going to run with this button. We're going to call it make boxes. And inside of our form, we're going to have an input, just one simple input, nothing really to it. We're just going to be able to add additional elements to our array through this box, and we'll do that later as well. We're going to need a button to actually execute a function to take this text that we add in our input and add it into our array. And then our info box right here is going to be the target of our JavaScript. So that's all the HTML we need. Let's take a quick look. It doesn't look good. I'm sorry. I didn't want to go overboard with what we were doing here. Oops, quick pause. Okay, so this is where we should be at. We have our buttons here, our make boxes button, which does nothing, our add values box, which does nothing yet, and then our box the input for the form, which we're going to use in a little bit. So let's go ahead and actually get to the meat of this particular program. Like I said, those don't look good. It kind of bothers me, but you know what? This isn't about that. So let's go ahead, go down to the bottom of our page. We have that placeholder in this skeleton for our JavaScript at the bottom of the page. So let's go ahead and start things off with our script tag. All right, so inside of our script, we're going to declare a couple of variables to start with. And those variables are going to make, hopefully, things easier as we go along to make it so we don't have to refer to things, so many things. I personally find it super annoying to type document.getElement by ID like 25 different times. So anyways, we're going to declare two things. First off, we're going to access our info box. We're going to make that a constant. That is not going to change on the screen. And we're going to also set essentially what's going to become a target for, a variable we use to set our inner HTML. As opposed to just setting it, what we're going to do is we're just going to set the variable and then have the variable set the inner HTML. We'll show you that in a minute. Also, we're going to declare one more variable, and this is going to be our actual array. So arrays are declared, hit the shift by accident. Arrays are declared in a different way. You use the square brackets. That's what tells JavaScript that this is an array. Unlike a standard variable that holds one piece of information, an array holds multiple pieces of information. So in this case, what we're going to do, I'm just going to put this one in there as well, just because it saves you from having to suffer through me typing. In this case, we're going to have an array with 3 items in it. Box 1, box 2, and box 3. Those are both text. They're surrounded in quotation marks because they are text elements. There's a lot of different ways that you can do arrays. This is by far the most simple version, which is a good way to start. So now we have this array declared, and let's go ahead and just set a couple of different properties then. So our info box value, we're just going to set something kind of random in here. And this is just HTML, just the most basic thing we can do so we can make sure our button works. And for our info box, we are going to go and we're going to set the inner HTML to be equal to our info box value. So basically, this is just initialization code. So when you first write it, this is even separate of all the functions. We declared these variables here at the top outside of any of our functions, so we can refer to them throughout the entirety of the page, and we can use them in our functions. And this is just to simply initialize the code. So now when we refresh the code, what we should see is we should see the word purple come up in here. And we do indeed. The reason that that happens is because we set our info box, the HTML inside of our info box, to be the H1 that is purple, just a basic value, again, just to make sure it works. So let's take a look real quick at our actual HTML that we already put in there. So we know we have a function here that is going to be called generate boxes. Let's go ahead and I'm just gonna copy what we put up in here, because why type it and risk a mistake? And down here in our JavaScript, we create the function called generate boxes. So this is the function we're going to use to, as you might have guessed, generate the boxes inside of our info box in the HTML. So first things first, we are going to take our info box value And we're going to set that to be nothing. And then we're going to skip a few lines. Actually, we can just copy this line now that I think about it. And we're going to just reset the inner HTML of our info box. So what we're doing here is, in the most basic sense, well, we're just making sure our function works as we click the box. So we set it to purple by default. When we click this to start with, then our purple should go away and we should reset it to be blank. Let's just double check, make sure our click function's working before we go on. As we test our JavaScript, it is important to make sure that you test frequently. So when we click make boxes here, purple does indeed go away. We've reset the value. Great. Okay. So next up is the arrays. So this array that we have here are box titles. This contains right now 3 items. One of the absolute best array methods that you can possibly use is we have this thing, our box titles, and then we have this for each loop. So what this for each does, and this is a very, very new JavaScript ability here, this makes life so much better. It really does. So what this does is it loops through all of the 3 items in our array, and it's going to do a certain thing for each one of them. So the setup of this is kind of weird. And this is something that I am still getting used to as we speak. So for each one of these things, we are going to go, and for each one, we're going to run a specific function. And we have to pass in this B. So what this B does is, like, essentially that's the array element. So B for our first time through this would be box 1. So as we loop through this array, every time we are going to do this, we are going to set our info box value, and we're going to add some specific stuff. So we're going to create a div, and I'm just going to put this in little chunks because you're going to suffer through me typing, trust me. So what we're creating, actually, we're writing HTML. So we're going to create a div with a class of box, which we wrote CSS for already. We're going to create an H3. So the H3, what's going to be the value of that is whatever we have as B. And then we are indeed going to close our H3. So it's a little bit weird because we're writing HTML kind of on the fly. And I'll show you how this works in just a second. So now, just to simplify then, for our info box value, we're also going to add a little bit more just to make it so it's not one massive line of text. We're just going to add pretty much a generic paragraph of text underneath it. And this is our standard flexbox. You've done this many times, where we have a heading and a paragraph inside of a box. So what we're doing is we're creating a div, we're creating an H3, we're creating a paragraph, and we're closing our box div just like that. But now the power of JavaScript is that we're not doing this once, we're doing this, in this case, 3 different times. So let's go ahead and take a look at what happens when we run this code. So when you refresh, you make sure you refresh your page. When you make boxes this time, this is what you should get. You have box 1, box 2, and box 3, and you see that those correspond to the 3 elements in our array. Box 1, box 2, box 3. If we add a box 4 here at the end of our array, then we go and we refresh. You see you actually get 4 boxes. And this is the power of JavaScript, is with one line, with essentially by typing the one box 4 on our array, we've added an entire new chunk of HTML. That is the power of JavaScript. So it's a little bit weird to see how it works. I'll give you some links to explore a little bit more about arrays, but basically, like we said, we have a variable that now holds 4 different pieces of information. So now the real cool thing is on the fly, you can now add values to your array and regenerate your HTML based on those values. So down here after generate boxes, we know that our function is going to be called add array values. We already have that in our HTML. So let's create our function. Right under our other one. Well, I don't know what that is, did. Interesting. So for our add array values, we're going to use our DOM a little bit. And we've done this before. It's still pretty new. And to be honest, sometimes I have to look this up. It's just something that, for me and my brain, always requires a little bit of refreshing. So for our form input, we're going to just declare this, and we're going to access this from our document. And this is another easy one. We only have one forms, so remember in computer, you start counting at 0. So it's the very first form you have, form 0. And elements, we only have one element in our form, so that is element 0. So what we're going to do for this function then is we're going to use our alert method. And we're going to use the dot value to see if we're getting the correct thing. So what we do, our variable is actually the input. So our input is, as opposed to having to type this thing every time, we're just saving ourselves from having to do that. So let's just go ahead and take a quick look and go refresh our JavaScript and see if this works. Now, the alert method is something that you could also use console.log if you want, that's fine. So if we click add value, you should get a pop-up message that says hello. If you type something different in there, come on, go away. If you type something else, it should say whatever you type in there exactly. So now the reason for the alert is just to make sure that we're actually getting this value. It is something I've learned over countless hours of suffering. So for the finish of our function, what we're going to do is we're going to add this item into our array, and then we're going to be able to click our generate boxes again, and we'll see a difference. So there's a specific method that we use. It's called push, to push a value into an array. So we're going to just comment our alert out here. We no longer need that. We tested that it works. It gets annoying if it keeps happening. So we declared our box titles. That's our array. And what we're going to do is we're going to push a new value into this. And we already know what value we're going to do. It's this thing that we just alerted. So whatever we typed into our box, we're going to push that in, make that part of our array. Again, array holds multiple pieces of information. It doesn't matter how many. It could be like 20,000. Could be a Google search. You never know. So just as a quick make people feel like they did something sort of situation, we're going to alert them a message. I'm just going to give you the message we're going to alert. And sorry, I don't like the space between. I'm just going to erase that. So we're going to push in our new value for our array. We're going to say that we added that successfully to our array. And then as a very last step, we're going to reset our form input value here. And we're going to clear whatever was typed into our form so it goes away. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what happens as this runs. So we're going to make our boxes first. We have 4 boxes. That's what was in our array to start. So now we're going to add cookies. And we're going to just click add value. We get cookies added successfully. Perfect. So now here's the fun part. When you make your boxes, cookies is now a box. And now if we add popcorn, if we add that, boom, it added successfully. When we regenerate our boxes, look at that. We added one more item to our array. Now, this is in our code. This is temporary. Usually for something like Amazon, you have like a database that stores this information. So like when you refresh this, all the things we added go away because it's just in the computer memory. So here, if we add Hawaii, I have no idea why. It says that, and then you can keep adding here, but it's not saved anywhere. So anyway, that's our array. Arrays are multiple pieces of information. This is kind of one of the ways that we go through that, and that for each is something that I do very, very frequently. As it turns out, I work with arrays quite frequently in a number of different ways, and that's kind of our first little dive into that, setting us up to do some more things with arrays in the future. So as always, if you have questions, please let me know. Other than that, I will see you for Arrays 2 very shortly.